Welcome to the Mind Body Energy Project.
Yes, we're back to us.
Back to us, week
Yeah.
2 of being in our rabbit holes.
hmm
So, before we get into our topic, it just dawned on me. This is probably a great way to start out October because of, we have Hallows Eve at the end of the month and
hmm
like the veil being thin. So I didn't even think of that until like right this moment. This is interesting for this
Yeah.
year. But how are you
Yeah.
doing today, Tiffy?
So far, so good. Just finishing up some tweaks on the chakra course, which by the
Yep.
time this airs,
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. I'm like, by the time this airs, it'll probably be like
yeah,
ready to rock.
yeah, we've told you guys already that we're pre-recording stuff, and so it makes our time and space weird
Yeah,
and obscure.
which
But
also
also,
goes with today's topic.
yes, thank you. Mind reading. That's not the
Yeah.
topic, but it happens from time to
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. It's one thing I would say too, just like as a little side note before we get into it, this year, like I've been reflecting back a lot like over the last few days, and it really has been an interesting year for growth, which I know we grow all the time, and I know we're in a constant state of like growth and evolution, but when we just look at it in a window of a specific time frame, and like
hmm
this year in particular has been very enlightening for me. Like I feel like this year has provided a lot of self reflection and observation and like self work. I
Yeah.
think maybe differently than years prior. I don't
I
know.
agree with that sentiment. I feel like um, it's been, I feel like I've been in self-observation nonstop this year.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a new trend and that's the way it's going to forward progress or if it's something about this year.
Yeah.
If it's
Uh,
constant, I'm going to have to reevaluate things.
yeah. I mean, it
Not that we
really,
shouldn't always be in self-observance, we should, but it's been acute this year.
yeah. And, it's interesting because we talk about like, you know, where we have our own personal cycles and processes of healing, but then we also talk about like on a collective level that we're all going through like shifts and changes, different energies on the planet, different things being revealed, blah, right? And it kind of thinking about this too, it makes me think of how many people I've spoken to this year, and it almost feels like this collective cycle of initiation, like, hey,
Yeah.
like here's what's going on, here's what's being held, here's what needs to be worked on, here's what needs to be looked at. Like it just has felt like a hyper focus of
hmm
what has been beneath the surface on so many levels for all of us.
Yeah, it's making me think about. I know we had a lot of planets go retrograde in the beginning of the year, and some of them were the longer, the ones that stay in quite
Mm-hmm.
a more expansive time. And I was just starting to think about, I can't remember them right now off the top of my head, but just thinking about what planets are where for this period of time that may be influencing what we're experiencing collectively.
No, totally. Yeah, I know we had Saturn retrograde, Pluto, and I think Uranus as well. Like some of them were either coming out of or going into, but yeah,
hmm
those are the ones I know
But
you're
the outer
talking about.
planets, right? The ones that take a
Yes,
lot longer to cycle through things.
yes,
Yeah.
slower moving. Yeah.
Yes.
So, well, I
hmm
guess we can segue into today's topic.
Yeah.
This should be interesting. I'm like, good God, where are we going to go with
I
this?
know. I know.
So what we decided we would talk about today is expressions of space and time. I'm sure as many of you may remember, one of the podcasts we did recently, and Tiffany mentioned wanting to talk about time. And then I personally wanted to talk about our different experiences and different states of consciousness. And we recognize that it could be blended. So
hmm
um, yeah, so just to make it clear, I guess clearer, what prompted I'll ask you to what prompted the time thing for you, but what prompted the different states of consciousness for me was thinking about how, one, again, self-observation, right? Like a lot of times we don't pay too much attention to what our experiences are in these different states of mind and awareness, we dismiss a lot. Like some things we just kind of, because it's regular for us, we don't tend to really examine it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about how I experience the world around me and like in conversation, and maybe if I'm in like a beta brainwave, which we'll go more into. But then I thought about too the differences of how I experience sensation, feeling, perception when I'm in meditation, how that's like totally different sensory experience versus like what it's like when I'm in my dream state and what that experience is like. So I was just thinking about that, like how we have this capacity to experience consciousness on different levels and what that looks like for us, what that may even mean, and how we can be more mindful about how we interact in those different states of awareness.
Mm-hmm. I'm really excited to see where we go with this today.
Yeah.
There's so much depth to all of this. So as far as the time thing goes, I was out on a run one time when had my running career of 2.5 years. And I had this thought come up and I was like, geez, I'm really happy that I'm not the person that had to invent time.
Mm.
I know, like, who not invent it, but like put the parameters around it to structurize it. We follow the sun and the moon and how the axis of the earth is tilted and how that makes our days longer. But somebody created the constructs and was like, okay. And they had to build in like leap years and then the equinoxes and all this stuff. And then somebody was like, let's do daylight savings,
Mm-hmm.
all of that's beyond me. I'm glad that I didn't have to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But what comes with that is that we've taken this application of a construct and we are now, I don't want to say slaves or victims to it. That's the wrong. We're followers of the structure, and we organize our day and our life around it, which is great. But what that also does is it could lend itself to taking us really out of right now, and right now is the only thing that actually exists. And I think, at least in America, we're all struggling with this idea of presence and being present right now. And then this idea that anxiety and depression do not exist in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
Depression exists in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and anxiety exists in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things are assimilated with the thoughts of like, oh, this happened in the past, and we get depressed, and anxiety can only exist of anticipating what may be coming. And then also, I'd thought about this, but somebody actually made it a visual, and I wish I had done it before we got on, but I forgot to. So she took this piece of paper and put a bunch of dots on it, and the dots represented a timeline. And then she folded it so that all the dots aligned into this fold, right? So it shows that time may be linear as we go about it, but when you bring it all together, everything in the past affects your current, and your current will affect your future, and vice versa. Because of what happened in the past, you can change right now, which is going to change the future.
Mm-hmm.
So all of it is relevant to right now.
Yeah. Everything you said made me think of like 10 different things. That's why I had to write it down. But with the very last point you made, that's like one of the things I like to focus on in meditations or guided journeys with people, is helping us to recognize that a lot of times we're functioning from energies that have nothing to do with like this moment, right?
Yeah.
So like how you can think of some event or a person or something that happened to you prior, but as soon as it comes to mind, the feeling, like the memory of it starts to activate like real time sensation for you as if it's happening to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like if we think out into the future, how we can then come into the state of emotional like response and feeling and vision, even as if it's happening right now. And so it is very interesting because that's one of the things I highlight for people of, if you heal what you hold right now, by default, you are essentially healing the energy of the past, like how you held it. That's why our perception is so important. Like, yeah, whatever. So you sent me down a rabbit hole with that. But another thing that you said reminded me of astrology. So, I love Ancient Aliens. And I was watching the most recent episode. Well, when this airs, it won't be, but I was watching the most recent episode, and they were talking about astrology and how all of these different ancient civilizations had the same or very similar methods of tracking the same constellations. And like, how interesting is that they all were looking at these same constellations and patterns and coming up with what these different star patterns represented and the energies associated with it. And so it made me think of too, like what you said, like the way they had to follow literally the stars and recognizing which seasons were coming, because that was going to impact like their harvest and their survival. So it's almost like time was relevant or is relevant for this space, especially in ancient times, and that it like directly correlated with their livelihood, like really understanding the movement of the planet and when things would occur so that they could plan accordingly. Like, that's kind of interesting.
I have so many thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big one.
Rabbit hole. Hey.
Yes. So I think it's interesting when, as you were talking about that, I think about how far away from nature we've gone in our current society. And so that's why these things like astrology have become a little bit, they've been shoved into the woo-woo basket. You know, it's like, oh, that stuff, those people doing those things. But the really, because we didn't have technology, we didn't have these other things that are now drawing our attention away to what we think reality is, what we're labeling as reality, that these ancient things, practices are no longer viable. But
wait, can I just say really quick, when you say that, it reminds me of like how people dismiss like nature as a science. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what would be more scientific than nature itself?
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's systematic, you know?
It's hilarious. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Science is wonderful and it's a structure we need. But again, the scientific method, as well as it works, it is one method and one pathway that takes out all these other outliers in order to go in one direction. But nature and science is actually completely interrelated.
Yes.
It surrounds us.
Yeah.
Everything is connected, and it's not just like something that's on Dr. Bronner's soap for the hippies. Like, we are all one.
Whoa.
I know. I wasn't even where I was going.
But that's really cool, though, because it makes me think of the brilliance that is really found when people allow that merger of like science and the metaphysical. And there are a lot more people going in that direction and doing this. And I think that's really the only way we're going to understand the layers of this multi-dimensional reality that we live in. So it kind of brings to mind, too, the part of the consciousness aspect of this for me, in that if someone would have told me that, yeah, I mean, like, you have different states of consciousness and you're able to be perceptive of different realms and different energies and different things and different aspects of your own mind, just to hear that, I would have thought it sounded crazy, and I wouldn't really be able to process that or really get what that means or the possibility of what that is. So for me, it's been very interesting just having the experience of meditation and energy work and these things, and recognizing just how multifaceted we really are. And it is a very different experience to, like, I'm looking at Tiffany here and we're having this conversation, and it's very, it has a certain feeling to it, right? It's real. It feels very real. But then if you came and got on the Reiki table and we both were in a meditative state, and I allowed myself to connect with another state of consciousness, and when a lot of people have done experiments on people doing Reiki, for example, they move into an alpha brainwave, so out of beta and into alpha, which is deeply connected with our meditation, then I'm communicating with you in a different way. So instead of having to visually, like, watch each other's body language, and instead of having to hear each other speak, we still have this opportunity to communicate, but on another level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we literally feel impressions of each other energetically, and I'm able to see you beyond the physical eye. Now I'm seeing you from my intuitive mind, which is a totally different experience than what I'm just looking at the out picture of your physicality, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're designed to do that. So that to me is pretty amazing when you think about not just the different levels we can access, but what it's like, the experience of being in different states of mind.
Yeah. So I think it's good to highlight these different states of mind. So what you're in your example,
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking about these different states of waves, it's a different frequency. Like our physical energy, our energy of thoughts and emotions they're vibrating at a different level. So if you think
Yes.
about, like, we have to vibrate at a certain level with our thought patterns as we speak right now, because we're thinking, we're interacting with each other. But then we move into that alpha state where we're a little bit more relaxed, and then our vibration, I think it picks up or slows down. Whichever way it goes, it assimilates with each other.
Can I just
So
say that big part of what you just said is relaxation?
yes, yeah,
Just okay, go ahead.
because we're taking out that thinking part. When we
Yes.
remove the thinking part, we start to relax more. And then that is when we access more of this wisdom, the universal wisdom. That is when we communicate on a sensory level versus a thinking level.
Mm-hmm. When you say that, it reminds me of two things. Rules of engagement is one. I'll get to that. But the physical sensation that changes too. So
Mm-hmm.
for anyone listening, I mean, just think about that. Like when you just take note of how you feel right now, like just tune into like, how do I feel in my body? How do I feel just in general? What word comes to mind to describe it? And if you took a moment to just like take a breath and let your shoulders fall, like, you know, how many times we don't recognize how
Mm-hmm.
much tension we're holding, and you literally just let your shoulders fall. That's it. And then all of a sudden you're like, it's like your whole body just took a breath, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden your overall feeling has changed. Then you
Mm-hmm.
add the layer of like closing your eyes, tuning out the physical world, right? Focusing on your breath, as we always talk about. But then again, there you go, deeper into a state of relaxation. And now all of a sudden you become aware of these other states of consciousness and awareness that are available to you all the time, but you're usually just focused on the material and the tangible and
Mm-hmm.
what is, again, what we have labeled as reality. But it's fascinating to me because, like, what would make any experience you have any less real, you know?
Right. And so, piggybacking off of what you said, with the breath, what you said, taking a breath in and releasing your shoulders, it made me think about how if we breathe deep into our bellies versus our chest,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the time we're just chest breathing and we don't get the breath down into our belly, which sends us into a deeper relaxation. But when we're just chest breathing, we're tapping more into our fight or flight system, which is the go, go, go. That's our sympathetic nervous system. Our fight or flight, which is like getting us to go. And that gets us more jazzed up. We're more constricted. Other parts of like our digestion shut down. Like all these other physicalities are working with our mind, because our mind is like, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, because we're on a time schedule.
Yeah. Wait,
Right?
I love that you said jazzed up. But
Jazz hands.
that you said, it reminds me of, just for people who are sticklers, when I took yoga teacher training, our teacher that focused on this section where, because in yoga teacher training, you do a whole part about physiology and like the body and mechanics and just all of it, right? You know that, but for people listening, of course. And so the teacher that we had for that, she was very like such a stickler about saying like breathing into the belly and breathing into the thing, any part of your body. Like I tell people sometimes to ground, breathe into your feet, right? But
Mm-hmm.
there are people that are black and white. So if you're thinking like you can only breathe through the lungs, like that's literally the organ that's helping to process the breath. When you hear that, it's more like thinking of allowing your consciousness to go to the area while you're breathing, right? So, and it's one of those things you can test out. if you're like, what are these girls talking about? Like if you close your eyes and let your total mind and awareness move down, like you're focusing down into your belly, then breathe while you have focus there. It's literally as if you are breathing into the belly. And I think that speaks a lot to that mind-body connection.
Well, now I'm mad that I didn't do research about this part because it's something that I don't know off the top of my head.
What?
The mechanics of how the diaphragm works, because the diaphragm is underneath the lungs and above the somewhere in the belly area. And I think when we breathe more into
it's like
deeper, it expands our diaphragm
there.
more. So
Yes.
it's not just about the lungs. And if we're just lung breathing, then we're not, if we think about just holding the breath in our lungs, then we're not, our diaphragm is still kind of constricted. And that means the oxygen isn't fully dispersing through our body.
Oh God, I sent her in a tailspin of her technicality. But the point is, like, you can breathe into any part of your body.
Yeah.
You could breathe through your hands. Like I tell people to do that in Reiki, like breathe through your hands. And
I think you triggered me a little bit about people just thinking that you can only breathe into your lungs. And I was like, yeah, scientifically, but there's other scientific things.
Well,
I'm going to look it up.
Oh, Jesus. This is why. But for everybody else, just like know that when you hear people say breathe into different parts of your body, they're saying like send your mind or your consciousness into the space while you're breathing. So it's like your mind is directing your breath in a way.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So if you've only been lung breathing, try this. I'm so sorry.
But it's interesting too, because, and if anything, it's more of like the capacity of the breath. And here we are in a rabbit hole, like totally in a different topic. But it's like when you said chest breathing, it's like more of like we're shallow breathing, right? And a lot of times you are. And it's funny, I think of times where people are very tense and laying on the table, and you can tell it's like they look like they're barely breathing. It's all here and very shallow. And when you tell someone, take a deep breath, and then it's like that breath moves down into the belly, like it moves down into their body. And I mean, because we automatically breathe, we often don't pay attention to how we are breathing. But to bring it back into our topic, the breath can also be used to alter our states of consciousness and our states of awareness. So think of if you did go into a deep breath, especially if you were anxious before going to bed, allowing yourself to like calm the entire system by breathing very deeply, you can lull yourself into the state of sleep, you know? Or if you are someone who takes some like short, shallow breaths and like are lifting at the same time, you can alter and send yourself into like a theta brainwave. So there's so many different ways that the breath can also correlate to accessing different states of consciousness.
So speaking of states of consciousness, since we are, let's talk about dream states.
Yeah.
Let's go extreme. So I know like people out there probably have like dream books or they've looked at them, or hopefully everybody that's listening has ever experienced a dream. And if you haven't, that's really interesting. Please let us know. But I think we oftentimes take dreams for granted because we just wake up and we're like, oh, my brain was weird. It was doing all these things when I was asleep, you know, or we try to read into them based on a dream book. But the reality of what a dream is, we're in another state of consciousness, in another realm of existing, in a sense. Our physical body is when we're sleeping, our physical body is, our immune system's ramped up and it's just doing what it does. And it's like our mind is kind of doing the same thing. It's kind of like clearing out. It's kind of going through, I think, all of what our thought patterns have been, and it's kind of clearing out stuff. Or it's working with our physical body to send us a message about something. So then we wake up and we're like, we take it for granted. We're like, oh, that was really weird. I don't know why this happened. Or we can't make sense of it. So we dismiss it. But what I think is really interesting about that state of consciousness is that there's a lot of really important things in there. And I think we talked about this. I don't remember when we talked about this, but our third chakra center is about how we see things. And a lot of times, how we see things, we can't interpret just based on our language. We need to use symbols, and we use symbols to create patterns. Huh?
Sixth.
Sixth, third eye chakra.
You said our third chakra, so you didn't say
sorry.
eye. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just
sixth chakra, third eye chakra.
People not watching you point to your forehead.
Right. I forgot where I was in space. I forgot that people aren't seeing us; they're just hearing us. We're still with you, though. Yes. So essentially, I think what I'm trying to wrap up and say is that our dream states, even though we don't feel, we may be dismissing our consciousness of it, and that these dreams are just coming up and we don't know how to interpret them, or we just say that that was really weird, that if we cleared away all of our labels and our judgments, that we could start to really understand the language of that state of consciousness.
Right.
By associating the patterns and associating the symbols.
So that's where, when I wrote down a minute ago and I said rules of engagement, that's exactly where it comes into play with our dream state. And you made me think of a couple of things. You made me think of our intuitive mind and how when people start to open up their third eye, that their dreams do become more vivid, more active, more interactive, and these types of things. You also made me think of sleep paralysis, which I'll talk about in a second. Yeah. Because, yeah. But the rules of engagement. So earlier this year, you remember this, I got like in a meditation, this thing about do some 12-week class called Fabric of Creation. And I did. And thankfully people showed up.
That was this year?
Yeah. It was the beginning of this year. I know.
That felt like eons ago.
Yeah.
Even though this year went fast. See, people, time and space. It's not really real and relevant.
No. And so I did that class, and it was a year ago, I should say. It was probably more like a year ago, to be fair. And one of the modules in it was about different states of consciousness, but I remember something that came through was about rules of engagement, right? So how this is the part that was like, ooh, and I don't know why I didn't go back to it. It's something I want to dig into, but it was a message coming through about how we believe we have like these limited rules of engagement in this reality, right? Like I could think like, oh, I want Tiffany to fly right now, but you're not, you're just still right there in your seat, right? But if I was in my dream state, in that state of consciousness, if I am, depending on like what state I'm in my dream, I could be like, I want Tiffany to fly, and you would just float. Like my mind would literally control everything that goes on in my dream state. Like my mind is the creator of that entire reality if I can get into a state of engaging with my dream in a particular way, right? Mm-hmm. And so the message that came through was kind of like, if you can learn to understand the rules of engagement in that state of consciousness, it will then start to bleed over into this reality where you will understand the magnitude of like our minds and how we're able to create. So where we may feel like time in this reality is like slow moving, I think about something, now I got to go work or do some blah, blah, like this whole process to unfold. Where in dreams, it's like real time, right? So it was interesting that the idea that if we come to understand a level of consciousness that we haven't quite explored in depth, that it would also help us to understand the functionality of the mind and creation in this realm as well. Does that make sense?
I think we just need to end that there. Podcast is over. My mind is blown. Good night. I'm just kidding. It's not over yet. But damn, girl.
Yeah, and this is the kind of stuff that goes on in my own little bubble over here.
This is why we shouldn't stray from our rabbit holes, because the past two have been really, really deep since we haven't done this in a while. Like we're going real hard, real fast, deep down into the rabbit hole.
This is what we think about. So anyway, so sleep paralysis. Can I ask?
Wait. No. Can we come back to this first? I'm not done yet. Okay, because I want you to make me fly.
Yes.
Although I don't know how that would actually pan out.
But
Never
it
mind.
like this, right? So I believe that there are people who can actually levitate.
Sure.
How? It
I
has
don't
to
know.
be something mental that they're really
Oh
tapped
yeah.
into to allow that possibility. I have experienced people that can physically move objects just with their mind and their intention, you know? So it's like, obviously, we're capable of doing
Oh yeah.
things beyond what we yet understand or even believe is possible for ourselves.
Yeah.
And it is, again, like if you think about that, it's kind of like an outpicturing of the dream state. Because, yeah, my dream, I could totally fly.
So as you were saying that, this is what came to mind. Like we can manage the idea in that state of consciousness that we're managing, but then we come into the physical realm and we don't quite know how to do it yet because the vibrations are totally different.
Exactly.
That's what came
Different
up.
rules of engagement.
Yes, the different
Yeah.
rules of engagement have to do with the frequency of vibration, which is
Yes.
energy. And
But
again,
imagine if you could tap into that frequency of the other state of consciousness while engaging in this state.
I think we need to
Honey.
talk about that for a hot second because I think that we all have experienced that in a way. Like the
Yeah.
extreme example here is Yolanda making me fly.
Right.
Okay, that's extreme.
Yes.
Could we get there someday? Maybe.
Yes.
I don't know. Will we find
Unbelievable.
out? Perhaps. However, to tone it down a bit to make this more digestible for people is the whole idea of like, oh, I thought of this person and then they called me 2 minutes
Right.
later. Okay. That's happened to everybody. Or like, oh, I just thought of this thing and then it happened.
Yes.
That's the same exact thing. And
Yep.
it's not coincidental. It's something that was working in your field of vibration.
Called
And
into being, or
yeah,
you sensed, or yeah.
right. And now it's starting to really identify with those moments and then start working with the practice of it and understanding like, how is it that I am the creator of this?
It reminds me of like someone just recently told me, I forget what they were, I'm going to make up what they were thinking about because I can't remember exactly now, but it was something like they were thinking about how fun it would be to go to the circus. And then the next day someone called them, invited them to Cirque du Soleil. Do you know what,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
those types of things? It's like very
And
interesting.
if we could just bottle up understanding how to do it and do it all the time, wouldn't that be great? But however, this is our journey of starting to really understand our true power.
Yeah. I mean,
And
our
the journey
potential
is the
is,
practice. You have to practice at it. So practicing is getting your ego out of the way, breaking through the constructs of what we've just been fed to
can,
believe.
can I tell you what this reminds me of too before we go to sleep paralysis?
Yeah.
This always makes me think of the different experiences that people have to induce altered states. So whether it's like
Hmm.
ayahuasca, DMT, like shrooms, whatever people do, like you can do a lot, bring in different chemicals into the body to activate your ability to be in altered states of consciousness or access other realms. And, you know, people have these very interesting experiences of, you know, where they communicate with other beings and
Hmm.
things and have these like life-changing insights come through, right?
Yeah.
It's very interesting to me because a lot of people always ask me, because of the work that I do, they think I'm interested in doing ayahuasca. So people ask me all the time, like, oh my God, have you done it? Like, ugh. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, no. And people are always like, what? Like, why? And the truth is because I'm like, okay, well, yes, I get that. I understand why some people may do it. And I think that may be even supportive for some people in their path. Like,
Sure.
the way, I don't know why, but I've never felt called to it. And one of the main reasons is because I'm more interested in figuring out how to do it on my own, because I know we're designed for it. Like our
Right.
brain naturally produces DMT. So it's like
Yeah.
there is a way. And yes, it's going to be slower. It's not going to be as, you know, easy. It's going to be whatever. Okay, fine. But I have to say, like, I've had some pretty freaking cool experiences just in meditation, just while doing energy work. And I know that if I were even more disciplined in my practice and if I were even more, you know, allowed more space for certain exploration, I wholeheartedly believe I could have put myself in a state of consciousness and awareness that would be similar to what people describe in having taken
Yes.
other things, you know?
I totally agree with you, and I'm of the same mindset too, for a couple different reasons. One, because I've had experiences in meditation that I'm just like, this is kind of what I would attune that to be.
Yeah.
Two, I don't know that I would want to be rushed into that state so quickly. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know that that's good for me based on my own design and like my need to understand things and control issues, which said
Yeah.
some other things. And then also, part of the control issues is also, what I have been through in my own personal experiences. I've had a lot of experiences with addiction and not personally, but like in my
Yeah.
essence of like people around me, I've seen that. So what has been instilled in me is this vibrational energy of like fear and, all these other things that oh, where did it go? I have another vibration that has informed me that, you know, I have a different perspective of what those types of drugs might do for me. But that's because of my mindset and the
Right.
influence of vibrations around me that have been ingrained in my experience. That may or may not be true for somebody else, and they might have a total different perception about it, and
Yeah.
it could work for them. But with those two ideas, my experience of things that I've built into my consciousness, but also like having gotten to a place and the belief that we are totally capable of it, but it does take work to get there.
Totally. And, even that I have to say as well, like I said, it's not my thing, but I get why people feel called to
Yeah.
do it. It either way it goes, whether you take ayahuasca or you just are diligent in your meditation practice, both show us what we're capable of. Like
Yeah.
both give us this experience of tuning into and tapping into these other states of consciousness that are our own. Like it's accessible to you. You couldn't have the experience unless that was part of your design and
Right.
a capability and availability, right?
Great point.
And just the fact that we have this ability to tune into other realms, like
Hmm.
what? Like if you like really sit and think about, like, that's amazing. Like even just a dream state, like bringing it out, bringing it back to, baseline. The fact that you dream, and not only can you see imagery like so vivid with your eyes closed, but you also physically feel the sensation so deeply, you experience it real, like really experience it, that you wake up feeling like you had the experience. And we say, like, I had the experience, you effing did. Like,
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like,
Yeah.
you did. Like, how
Right.
amazing is that? Yeah, so I don't know. I think just us people, humans, are designed like all of this, no matter how we tune into it, it's just fascinating that we are
Yeah.
designed this way.
Two things came to mind. One was, I think if people are not really grasping what it means to go into these other realms of consciousness,
Hmm.
how often do I have people that have gone to yoga and been like, oh my God, that Shavasana, I was so relaxed. Like your state of relaxation is an altered state of mind.
Right.
And I think that we think of them as different things, but it's not. It is another place that your mind is capable of going.
Hmm.
Um, and I think to just call it being relaxed is too simplistic
But I
because,
love the part of how the mind can regulate the relaxation of the body and vice
oh
versa.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
interplay
totally.
is everything.
But I think we've been a little bit disempowered to think like, oh, or we're just relaxed. And what you just said, it's like, no, it was a choice to consciously move to a different realm and vice versa.
Yes.
The other thing that came up, this has to do with different states of consciousness and time. One of my very first times visiting the West Coast, no, it was like an LA area. I didn't, coming from the Northeast, I didn't understand how the sun was a lot hotter here, or just
Hmm.
like closer. So I got a really nasty sun poisoning episode. The day was completely cast over. It was gray. I was wearing a long sleeve t-shirt, but and it was cold and I had no idea. So I got a gnarly, gnarly, gnarly sunburn and sun poisoning. And that night I went home to my friend's house and we were having dinner and I passed out face first in my bowl of spaghetti.
Oh, wow.
Out cold. Next thing I know, my friend's dad, who was a fireman, luckily, like probably dealt with weird things like this, is in my face. And he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm just taking a nap. Get out of here." Like, honest to God, it was such a, like, for the reality of what they were seeing happening, it was a matter of maybe like 10 to 20 seconds.
Yep.
But for me, I was knocked out. I had an entire dream sequence. When he asked me what I was doing, I honestly thought I was taking a nap and I couldn't understand why he was in my face. And
Yeah.
when I asked him how long I was out and he reported that it was like 10 to 20 seconds, I was like, no fucking way, because
Yeah.
I had this entire dream sequence that happened and it blew my mind. I
Wait,
mean, when I
so,
thought about it later, I was too busy being sick and shivering and being ill from sun poison, but
well, a couple of things. One, I'm surprised I have never heard that story yet because that
I
was a
know,
good one. Like, I feel
I
like you're
know.
holding out on me.
Sorry,
But
sorry.
there's one thing you remind me of with that I want to say, but I want to just go back really quick to ayahuasca because I meant to say too, I think the difference in like taking things to induce altered states versus just trying to figure out how you naturally have the capability. I think what you recognize in trying to do it on your own are your fears, your worries, your
Yes,
doubts, all of the things
100%.
that get in the way. But then you
Yeah,
also have this beautiful opportunity to understand yourself in deeper levels and figure out how to transmute those types of beliefs and
yeah.
uh, mind impressions and like mental imprints, right? Whereas like I think taking things, sometimes people are able to bypass their
Yes,
doubt and their fear of going into an altered state because just boom, they're just catapulted there.
yeah.
So that also is an interesting part to it. But back to what you just said, that makes me think of like how strange they say dreams are only like 30 seconds long or like just some blip on the screen. But like we all have had experiences where dreams feel long, like a movie, like you were in that dream all night. And literally, no, like they're not. That I think too speaks to the constructs of time in these different states of consciousness. Or how about the times where you're in a meditation and it may feel like so much time has passed while you were in that altered state, and then you come out and it was like, I only meditated for 5 minutes, but it felt like you were really in something for a long time. So I think that's kind of amazing too, to your point that even our perception of time completely changes just based on which level we are personally perceiving from or interacting with or accessing.
Hmm. I want to take us back to the ayahuasca thing.
Oh,
See, space and time, not relevant. When you said that, that's a really great point that we could take things to get us to that consciousness faster by bypassing that stuff. And again, if that is your choice, that's wonderful and great. But what I think also is important to note is that when we do bypass these things, they will still remain there, and then we'll have to deal with them. And I have talked to people who have had those experiences in those altered states where they're like, it was so glorious and amazing, but then I came back here and was depressed because you
mm,
experienced this thing, and by having bypassed your journey of understanding you, your fears, your demons, what your shadow, whatever you want to call it, by having bypassed that, you still have to go back through them to get here. So I think for just to, something, food for thought for anybody who is curious about that kind of stuff, is that our lessons, our shadow, all of that stuff is always going to be present with us. So by bypassing it, it doesn't mean it goes away, and we're
yeah.
always going to have to look at it.
And we should do like maybe a whole episode on this, maybe
I
like do
think
some
so.
research about like the origins of these ceremonies, like the
Yeah.
true like ayahuasca ceremonies and like the cultural references and why it's
Yeah.
done. Because I think that when we get into like the cultural origin and like how and why it's used
Hmm.
can be very different than
Yes.
how and why it's being used now,
Right. I think
and
that's a good
making
call.
sure that it doesn't become this crutch that you feel like you have to go back to access that
Right.
state
Yeah.
of being when, again, you're designed for it. So I think we should definitely make ayahuasca in of itself a rabbit hole
Yeah. I
and
love it.
really explore the origin and then
And really quick,
what's
just
going on now.
to like kind of plug into that from what we said earlier, is that I think as you're talking about like what cultural and ancient is, that when they were doing these ceremonies and rituals, we were, as a species, we were more in tune with nature, as we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about earlier with astrological stuff, or we're more in tune with nature then than we are now. So we're kind of like these little newbies that aren't really sure about how we work with nature, trying to jump back into these ancient cultures that were very much rooted in nature and understood how we connected in our ebbs and flows with the synchronicity with nature.
And I know with some cultures, it wasn't necessarily ayahuasca, but they used other
Yeah.
hallucinogenic
Peyote.
plants and things. And a lot of how it was used before was directly connected with our directly connected with people's process of initiation. Like, so
Mhm.
they were doing spiritual work and doing different spiritual practices, and that was a component of it, but it wasn't just some random thing. Like, there was like deep preparation that went along with it, deep like teaching. And anyway, we'll do an episode about it, but it'll be really interesting to learn more about it and
Yeah.
how it relates to how it's being used today. So, sleep paralysis.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. Let's
You
go
said
there.
something earlier that I forget what you said, but it made me think of, because I've had experiences. I mean, like, I was told what I was experiencing was sleep paralysis, but anyone that has experienced what they call sleep paralysis will tell you it is a very real thing. It can feel very scary, and it's far bigger than what people try to, like, in the medical realm, describe it as being, right?
What have you
And
heard of it as in the medical realm?
it's just like you're in this in-between state of being awake and being asleep.
Ah,
So it's
okay.
literally like, going with our conversation, it's like you have one foot in two different
Uh-huh.
states of consciousness. The bigger layer to that, though, that they don't really talk about, but people talk about in this realm, is it literally feels like,
A demon is holding you down and trying to take your
okay,
soul
wait,
out of the
no, whoa, you just went so
body.
dark on me. Although it
Sorry,
does, no, it does
that's what it
feel
feels
like,
like to me.
yeah, it does feel like your physical body is paralyzed. But that's the thing. It feels like, while you're, well, there's layers to it, because in some states of it, in some experiences of it, it feels like your physical body can't move, but you can feel your energy body either trying to separate from the physical body, which some people may think is like astral projection or astral travel, or it could be that you're trying to come back into the body. But it's more than just a state of consciousness. It's literally also this energetic experience of, like, you either coming in or out of your physical being.
Mhm.
But because you have one foot in two different realms, right? You have one foot in, like, let's say the dream realm, and you have one foot in, like, the conscious state of reality. It's confusing because you are experiencing your energetic self, which is boundless, but simultaneously your analytical mind is like, what the hell is happening to me? Is something trying to take me out of my body? Not recognizing it's all part of your own functionality, just
Yeah.
wires got crossed.
Uh-huh.
It is insane. But
So
then,
that
yes.
said, then do we attach these stories to it? For example, I'm trying to explain why I can't move in my dream state, where I'm like I consciously know in my human reality that I am in a dream, but I also am noting that I cannot move my body. So
Mhm.
then in order to make sense of that, my mind is like, well, there must be some dark force energy that's holding me down and not letting me move.
Yeah, I mean, you made that up. Like, why? Did you know? Like,
I
do
guess
you?
just to make sense. I
Yeah,
do
and
have to say though,
but
I,
that's that's the thing though. Like we make stuff up. Our
Yes.
analytical mind makes
Yeah.
stuff up to make sense of the experience, but
Right.
it's not necessarily true. And that's why we have to understand these other states of consciousness. So
Yeah. Yeah.
instead
Yeah.
of making
Good
things
point.
up, we're like, understand what is actually happening.
And as we were talking about dreams earlier, is that I guess that's pretty informative. The stories that we create in order to make sense is pretty informative about what we're actually thinking about.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about demons.
No, but I think it's just like a natural, of course, that's where your mind goes because I
It's
think
kind of
because of
scary.
how, well, because of Hollywood and
Yes,
things like
true.
this, whenever you think of like something taking someone out of their body or like some experience, anything paranormal, for the most part, culturally has been associated with something dark
Yeah,
rather than telling the truth of how our natural capability and functionality is, right?
right.
So I should back up and say this started for me having these experiences when I was 15. Yeah, I was 15 the first time it happened, and I was fucking terrified. I mean, of course, who wouldn't be if I'm awake, but I can't move, and it feels like literally, it felt like pulsation all over my whole body, like a weird vibration of like,
Hmm.
it was insane. And it happened a lot. I'm talking like every night to the point where I was sleeping with my light on. I was terrified. And then it started trickling off to where it would happen like maybe once a month. And then it trickled down to like a couple times a year. By the time I got into this work and started to have experiences in meditation, energy work, and these things, and I started to understand us in a different way, then I was able to not fight it when it happened. And one of
Hmm.
the times when I did that, I wasn't resisting what felt like leaving my body. And I had this experience of floating out of my body, and it felt like moving through molasses, like slow, like honey. But I was looking down at myself in my bed, like my energetic self looking down at my physical body in the bed. I mean, you can't make that shit up. You know what I mean? And it was just so like, what? And so then I felt it again, like this slow, like weird, like moving through molasses of like reconnecting to myself. And then I got up like, what the hell? It was insane.
Yeah. And as you say that, and you mentioned Hollywood, it makes me think about that too. I think we also get really afraid when we start to have those sensations because the only thing we know about leaving our body is
Death.
death.
Right.
Um, and this might relate to some people listening as well. I've had experiences that have been anxiety attacks that felt like I was leaving my body too. And then because I was already in a panic state, and I would be just driving. I remember just driving to a client one time and I was like going up a hill and I just was like, I feel like I'm leaving my body. And there was no reason for me to be having a panic attack, but it felt like I was leaving. And then I started to panic more like, oh God, am I going to die? But it was really just this state of like whatever my energy was doing because of whatever was coming up to the surface for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
But I went into fear mode because I was like, I'm dying. Like that's the only clear answer rather than being aware of what my energy was doing and being able to manage it properly.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. About 2 years ago, I went through this like spell of like a couple of months where I was literally experiencing vertigo, and it has something I had never experienced in my life, and it only happened within like a window of like a couple of months, off and on. And I couldn't figure out what was triggering it, but in that same period, I too was having experiences of like, I remember driving and like all of a sudden feeling like I was clicking into my intuitive mind, like unintentionally, because you start to notice what you feel like sensationally when you move into different states of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really strange thing because I was like, what is happening? And then I was having like this weird vertigo, and I still don't even know what that was about or why, but it was an interesting cycle, I guess,
Yeah.
nothing else to call it.
Our physical bodies are really informative of our conscious states and our energy.
Totally.
And I think
Well,
we miss the mark on that sometimes because it's not really empowered.
I have to say
Simple
too,
thought.
what you said just a moment ago of like we associate leaving the body with death. And again, I would say like anyone curious about some of the things we've talked about, I mean, you could look up what people do with like astral travel, astral projection, these types of things. But it also, you reminded me of when my stepfather died. I was there, like literally as he was dying. And that experience, even though at that point I was already doing this work, I had already done like master level training, I was teaching, blah, blah, blah. And I understood that we are, in essence, inhabiting this body. Like I understood it intellectually, but to actually see someone die, like it clicked and I understood it differently. Like it was so phenomenal to like literally like see and get, we are not just this thing, you know. It was like he was gone, like the entire essence of him. Like, and so like, again, beyond just like intellectualizing it, like to see it and to feel it real time of, okay, his vessel is right here, but he's not here.
Yeah.
It was like something really clicked for me. And I was like, wow, like we are really, like, what the fuck are we? Do you know what I mean? Like, it was like really a moment of like, what in the hell are we? That like, it was just, he was not there.
Because
like,
we are not this actual meat suit. This meat suit is just, it's a vehicle for our experience.
Being informed by this essence that is formless. Like, what? Mind blowing.
Oh, it's so crazy.
And you were worried about how we were going to go down this rabbit hole, honey. We went in.
We sure did. We sure did.
And it has been an hour, so
it
sad to
felt like
say.
It was 10 minutes.
So sad to say. It's time to go. Yeah, and it felt like 10 minutes.
It felt like 10 minutes. It really did.
We must have been meditating through this one.
You want to get into like in meditative states of flow?
Oh, girl, listen, we're at our hour. We'll have to put that on the list.
I know. It was meant to be on the list.
So how are you feeling about this conversation?
I feel good. I feel great. There's so much more to talk about.
I know.
So anybody who's listening, we're back. We're so back. Anybody who's listening, there is a lot of information. We kind of jumped around a lot, but there was a common thread through all of it. But if any of this conversation sparked something in your mind that you want us to go deeper about, please let us know, because there is a lot to pick from in this episode.
Oh, honey. I mean,
give us the juice.
Yes. Yeah, please let us know. And as always, we hope you enjoyed it. We hope your own thoughts are percolating. And I was trying to catch myself from not saying that with an accent. Anyway, so be sure to, let us know. You can leave a comment on the video in YouTube, or if you're listening in the podcast, you can hop over to Facebook and leave us a comment on our Facebook page at MBE Project. So is that a wrap, Tiffy?
That's a wrap. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.